Welcome, everybody, to this very special interview with Gary Schuller, or better known for myself as Dad. Dad, welcome.
Thanks, mate. Great to thank you. It's a privilege to have you interview me.
Well, let's get straight in because we don't have a lot of time. Tell us the meaning of RAW to you.
Resilience at work. And Danny, just a little background. A lot of our members have heard the story before, but it's worth sharing again. At the age of 19, I lost my left eye in a car crash. Not long after, my dad committed suicide. In more recent times, say 4 years ago, I had a leg amputated. I am a diabetic, and more recently, about 5 months ago, I was put on a dialysis 3 times a week. And recently, last week, or in fact, the week before, I saw the specialist, fairly somber doctor, professor. Didn't really have much to say except, yep, you'll be on dialysis for life. In the conversation, I asked the question about my lifespan, believing it would be 15, 20, 25 years. He said about 5 years. So I walked away, or in my wheelchair, rolled away, thinking, okay, that was a sombering thought. But the great thing about the whole scenario is resilience at work comes into play.
What was your initial thinking when you heard that news? And then tell us about the 48 hours afterwards.
Yeah, so my initial was sunken. I guess it's like, oh my gosh, that was a shock. But then because of my faith and my belief, I, within 48 hours, bounded back and said, you know what, let's make this the best show on earth. And whether it be 5 years, and I believe it'll be longer, by the way, because mindset is critical. It's all about resilience at work. And so without marching again, it's all about when speaking to clients, members of speakers, or anyone in fact, always inquiring about how they are and being there for them if they need prayer or if they need an uplifting, encouraging word. So to answer your question, 48 hours later, I'm back, bigger and better than ever. In fact, the one-eyed, one-legged warrior was born as a result.
Let's just, before we get into a little bit more about that, tell us about an experience in business where you've had to use resilience, maybe a kick in the guts you've had over the years, because I think people will relate. I mean, most people will relate to health, but we're all here for business. So, is there a business experience you can share over the years?
Well, there's one that we had, you might recall, a bit funny, really, in hospital, you and I. I just had my leg amputated, and you came in to visit me, and I had something in my mouth and something down this tube and there, that sort of, all over the place. And the phone rang, you may recall, and I said, "Good morning, good morning. This is Gary. How may I serve you?" And I think the point is there that regardless of the situation, it's always about the other person. Now, that's easier said than done because I'm sure a lot of our members will say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? You don't know my situation. You don't know my problem. Answer is I don't. But the fact of the matter is we've got to stay passionate, committed, irrespective, because dwelling on what may happen or the negatives doesn't actually resolve or solve the problem. So that may not have been an exact example of a kick in the guts, but I think it was just emphatic of the fact that in life, regardless of your situation, you've got to do your very best to stay on top. What's interesting, Danny, is often I ring a client and I may say, how are you? And they go, oh, Gary, my world's coming to an end. My toe's sore. I go, yep, I get what you're saying. Then I quickly recount my situation. I go, stop stuffing around, stop whinging, resilience at work, get off and make it happen. So that's one example, maybe not a great one, but nevertheless, it emphasizes always being positive and excited.
I was talking to a friend recently who works very high up in the kind of mental health space, and he was telling me that the number one issue people face it always is financial. Financial is the number one stress statistically in the world, and what causes all these issues along with mental health. So, for us in business, finance is typically a huge stress. And like you're saying, you talk about resilience. So, we've probably all experienced a kick in the guts financially as well, where something didn't quite go to plan. What would your advice be to somebody that gets that kind of news and then is incredibly stressed, but needs to get on with the task at hand?
The first thing I would always say is meet the problem at its head. So, if, for example, let's give a really extreme example. If you owe money to the ATO, just avoiding them is not going to actually help. You've got to make the phone call and work something out. And I think in business, if things are tough and, financially you're struggling, you've got to ask yourself, what is it about my business that's not working? So, for example, it could be systems process. Maybe you're not collecting money quick enough. Maybe you haven't negotiated up front the basis on which you do business. It's all about revisiting, I guess, your situation and going, what do I need to change? It's always about you first, as in me, not the other people. The people that play victim, it's this happened to me and this person did this and this person did that. When you hear those recurring stories, I never like to point out it's the person that I'm talking to, but in actual fact, it is because everyone else can't be wrong. So the advice I always give, whether it be financial stress or otherwise, hit the situation front on and ask yourself, what do I need to do? What do I need to change? What is it about my life that's not working? And how do I make it count? Because today is today, tomorrow is a gift that you don't know you're going to get.
Love it. So let's talk a little bit more maybe about resilience because we all face that, like I said, in business each day. For your situation, what are some techniques you use to get on with it? Because you talk about some of the bad news you've had over the course of your life, but bounce back very quickly. How does one get on back on the horse so quickly?
Well, I think you've got to ask yourself, what's the legacy you want to leave behind? How do you want people to remember you? And the situation isn't necessarily going to change, but what you do about it actually can change. So mindset's critical. But one of the things that I've just done recently, I don't believe, by the way, I'm going to die in 5 years, even though that's the prognosis. And statistically, I've been told that's the reality. My reality is different. But just for the sake of discussion and to answer your question, let's just imagine it is 5 years. What I'm now doing is I'm looking at our systems, our infrastructure, our structure, to see how do we, in the case of Speedbiz, how do we make sure and ensure that it continues on in the event that for whatever reason I pass early. And so it's a good thing because what it does is it actually helps you prepare the worst case scenario. And of course, if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, you're better off. So for me, it's just been about accepting the not accepting the prognosis, but accepting that maybe we need to look at what if and preparing accordingly with good news at the end.
Because with that attitude, I would suggest that if for the news you received, and I totally agree with you. I think it will be way longer than that anyway. But with that news, some people would say, well, if I've got 5 years, I'm going to go and play golf, or I'm going to go and do whatever, retire or travel the world or do whatever they want to do. So what it sounds like to me is that you have true passion for your business. Do you think passion has been lost in business overall?
I do, and even the dog there disagrees. But the reality is, I do believe that, and I think that if you want to play golf and travel the world, that's fantastic. You should do that. In my case, I love what I do. I truly do. I front up each and every day with an expectation of great things to happen. I believe in speed biz. I believe in what it can do and help and how it helps people. So I'm just passionate. And the other thing is, again, in my current situation, I can't travel anymore outside of a day because within 2 days, I've got to supposedly be on a dialysis machine. So, in that situation, that opportunity's been sort of taken away. Again, for our viewers right now, I do believe I'm going to walk away from the dialysis machine healed. And of course, that would make history like with the situation. But I did say to the professor the other day as I left his office, relatively somber gentleman, as I mentioned, I said, do you believe in miracles? He said, no, I believe in medicine. So, confliction of beliefs, but okay, understand science. I understand that they make their decisions around science. But to get back to your question, passion is what dictates my situation. Passion is what keeps me focused. Legacy, sharing, in my case, the good news. And I have to say this, the good news of the gospel. When the opportunity comes, I want to share that good news.
So just go. Let's just stick on passion just for maybe one more question because, like you said, you feel it may be lost nowadays. How does one identify if they're truly passionate about what they do, or if they're doing it just because it's turning over potentially a profit or feeding the family or feeding themselves, whatever it may be, versus being truly passionate about what they do? Do you believe it's important to be passionate in business, or is it better to have passions outside of business and your business life is to turn over a profit?
I think they're one of the same. If you're just on the cycle of just doing it, then it's going to dictate how well you really do and determine, I guess, the success of your business and how it's interpreted. And if you feel that way, you really probably need to sit down and ask yourself, what is it about me that isn't passionate? And make a change immediately, or when I say immediately, within a realistic time frame. And to answer your question, you know, passion outside of business is important, of course. But if you're a particular lover of sport and that's what you're passionate about, your business can often be a vehicle to enable you to have more money to enjoy sport more. So I think we've got to look at the business as the vehicle. And whatever vehicle you and I choose to be in or go in, it needs to be something you want to do because it's just not a job. If it is a job and you find that with people, then you can see almost on their face it's getting to Friday, so they've got the 2 days off, and Sunday night comes and it's depression because Monday's going to be all over again, or the start of the week all over again. For me, it's one of the same. I'm just passionate 7 days a week. And I'm actually probably, I know this sounds contrived, but it's true. I'm probably more excited about life than ever before because I want to make it count.
So we also talked about you said meeting the problem at its head when you're under either stress or you've got some bad news or a bad result, and you need to then obviously take ownership and charge of that situation. Once you do meet the problem at its head, what's the next steps from then to then build that resilience, to actually build something that's going to allow you not to find yourself in the same situation again?
So I think resilience is built on experience, the raw acronym that we've got here today, resilience at work. In order to be resilient, it's got to be working. And in order to understand that, you've got to see that life isn't always a bed of roses. Things do happen. But as I said earlier before, it's not what happens to you in life that matters. It's what you do about what happens. And I think if you have that experience, as you just mentioned, moving forward, you've got to say, what did I do about that experience that helped me get through? And how can I build on that resilience? What is it that I can feed my mind? What books, tapes, podcasts can I, listen to that's going to inspire me to go to the next step? And I guess the other thing is the old cliche. You've got to have a dream. You've got to have a goal. You've got to have aspirations. You've got to have timelines. You've got to have, I'm very much on stats, particularly in business. Stats don't lie often when it comes to the numbers in business. It will tell you, for example, how many calls you've made and the conversion from those calls. And as a result of that, you can start to fine tune your skill level. If your conversion is not great, what do you need to do to become better? That's a life skill. So numbers tell you a lot. And, skill set is crucial. Work on your skills so that you actually can do better in whatever it is you choose to do.
Let's maybe finish with one of your famous anecdotes, and maybe if you can share a story of somebody you've worked with over the years, hundreds of business owners and business people closely as a mentor or whatever, a member of of the group or various groups has been over the years. But can you maybe share a story of somebody that you found or met that was in a pretty dire situation and was able to turn it around, just to give everybody a bit of a bit of an uplifting end to this session?
There's one particular client who, probably 12, 13 years ago, came to me, was frantic, said, Gary, I need your help. I said, sure, what is it? He said, oh, would you believe I've got 1 week before I'm bankrupted by the ATO? I said, wow, well, what's transpired? He said, well, I had an accountant to assist. He couldn't. I had a lawyer involved. They couldn't. Basically, I'm at the end of my tether and I've got 1 week. In 1 week, I'm going to be met on the courts by the lawyer of the ATO and it's all over. I said, well, what would you like me to do? He said, would you be prepared to negotiate a deal for me? I said, sure, I will do what I can. The first thing you need to do is give me permission to speak to the ATO on your behalf, which in fact took an email letter. Once that happened, I rang the ATO and I basically opened up with what do we need to do to, resolve this? What do we need to do to get more time? And they said, well, even if we wanted to, we can't anymore. And we don't want to, by the way, we're going to bankrupt this guy because he's made many promises that he hasn't kept and he's avoided phoning us, blah, blah, blah. And so even if we even if we had the power now to make that decision, we wouldn't. I said, well, who has the power? They said, well, we've handed it over to our lawyer. I said, well, what would it take for me to speak to your lawyer? They said, well, it's not the norm. And me being me, I said, I understand it's not the norm, but my question is, what would it take? Cut a long story short, I got permission to speak to the lawyer who was prosecuting my client and about to bankrupt him 1 week later on the steps of the law courts. So the ATM must have briefed the lawyer to say to expect my call because I could almost hear him running to the phone, huffing and puffing as he grabs the phone before I even got a chance to speak. He said, I'm telling you now, it doesn't matter what you say, what you do, I'm going to bankrupt this guy. This guy's messed my client around the ATO. The ATO, one of my biggest clients, and he went on for a few minutes, exasperated at the end. I said, hey, I hear your pain. My question to you, sir, is what would it take to negotiate a deal? So he went on again. Oh, I told you, just I'm not going to, there's no way. It doesn't matter what you know. And he went on and on and on. I heard him for another few minutes. I let him get it all out. And I said, so, sir, I hear your pain and problem. My question is, though, what would it take? And this is what he said, something special. Now, when I'm on stage and I ask that or shared that story, I'd often ask the question, what did I hear? And somebody would often pipe up from the audience, something special, you got it. So when you're listening in negotiation, literally listening, you can hear things that others miss. So I threaded that, as I always talk about in negotiation, I threaded that call. I heard something special and I said, what do you call special? He said at least 50% now and negotiate the balance. I said that ain't going to happen. Let's start again. Cut a long story short, we negotiated a 12-month deal. The client got out of the situation, paid his dues in 12 over a 12-month period, and lived to tell the story. That's it. Remember, all things are possible. Always remember to negotiate. And Danny, it's been an honor to have you and my son interview me.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure we all got a lot out of that. And it's really awesome to hear the story. We're looking forward to part two.
You got it.